Family, there is something I need you to hear deep in your soul today. Prayer is not a ritual, it's not a performance, and it's not a last-minute emergency call. Prayer is the lifeline that connects heaven's power to your earthly journey. It is the God-given key that unlocks grace in places where you thought the doors were shut. When you walk through seasons of brokenness, prayer is the balm that heals. When you face confusion, prayer is the compass that guides. When you stand at the edge of despair, prayer is the bridge that carries you back into hope. But hear me, this is not just about saying words. This is about activating grace, pulling down divine resources that you could never earn, never deserve, and never produce on your own. You see, grace is God doing for you what you cannot do for yourself. It's His strength stepping in when your strength has run out, and the way you activate that grace on your journey is through prayer, not casual prayer, not distracted prayer, but the kind of prayer that says, Lord, I can't make it without you. Lord, I refuse to keep walking this path without your hand on me. Lord, I need your presence to heal my heart, my mind, my family, my destiny. Prayer is not meant to be a monologue where you do all the talking. Prayer is a dialogue where God releases direction, peace, correction, and healing. When you open your mouth, you're not just speaking into the air, you're sending words into eternity, and heaven responds with power on earth. Think about it. Prayer can reach where your hands cannot. Prayer can travel faster than your feet can move. Prayer can open doors no man can shut. Prayer can restore what time has stolen. And when grace meets your prayer, chains break, wounds heal, and journeys are transformed. Don't underestimate the enemy's strategy. He will try to silence your prayers because he knows if you ever learn how to activate the grace of God through prayer, his attacks lose their power. But if you refuse to stay silent, if you refuse to walk this journey on your own strength, if you declare, Lord, I'm calling on you, I'm leaning on you, I'm depending on you, then no weapon formed against you can prosper. The grace of prayer doesn't just heal your past wounds, it equips you for future battles. It sustains you in the wilderness, it lifts you in the valley, and it gives you victory on the mountain. So here's the call, don't let your journey be defined by what broke you. Let it be defined by the God who healed you. Don't let your story stop at the pain. Let grace, activated through prayer, write the chapter of restoration, renewal, and revival in your life. Family, the grace of prayer is waiting. Heaven is listening. Healing is available. All you need to do is activate it. Prayer is the divine lifeline that connects heaven's power to your earthly journey. Prayer is the divine lifeline that connects heaven's power to your earthly journey. And when you begin to see it this way, your entire perspective on life shifts. Too many of us treat prayer as an optional exercise, something we add on to our busy schedules if there's time left over, but in reality, prayer is oxygen for the soul. Just as your body cannot survive without breath, your spirit cannot thrive without prayer. It is the very channel that draws God's strength into your weakness and God's wisdom into your confusion. When you pray, you are not just speaking into the silence. You are connecting to the Creator of the universe, the one who holds all power, all authority, and all answers in his hand. And it is through this lifeline that you access the supernatural resources you need for the journey you are on right now. Every journey comes with challenges, valleys, and moments of weariness. There are times when the path feels too steep, when the burdens feel too heavy, and when the direction forward feels too uncertain. In those moments, prayer is the rope from heaven that pulls you through what you cannot pull yourself through. It is the whisper of God reminding you that you are not abandoned and that His strength is available to you. Prayer takes what feels impossible and places it into the hands of the God who does the impossible. Without prayer, you are left to fight battles in your own power, but with prayer, you allow heaven's armies to intervene on your behalf. Prayer is not about eloquence or performance. It's not about using the right phrases or sounding spiritual. It's about honesty, vulnerability, and dependence. It's saying, Lord, here I am, weak, tired, and in need of you. And knowing that he not only hears but responds, prayer turns your tears into petitions and your groans into intercession. It transforms pain into power and confusion into clarity. It is the process by which your limited perspective gets aligned with God's eternal vision. Prayer doesn't just change circumstances, it changes you while you are in those circumstances, strengthening your faith and anchoring your soul when the storm is raging. When prayer is neglected, you may find yourself wandering, striving, and running in circles, trying to carry the weight of life on your own. But when prayer becomes your lifeline, you realize that you were never meant to walk this road without heaven's support. God has designed prayer to be the very link between his throne and your steps, between his plan and your choices, between his power and your weakness. That is why the enemy will do everything he can to keep you silent, distracted, or too weary to pray. He knows that a praying believer is a powerful believer, a dangerous believer, a believer who is not defined by circumstances, but by the power of heaven working within them. When you truly understand that prayer is your divine lifeline, you stop treating it as a last resort and start treating it as your first response, the daily connection that makes the impossible possible and keeps your journey alive with divine strength. Grace is activated through prayer, releasing what you cannot earn or achieve on your own. Grace is activated through prayer, releasing what you cannot earn or achieve on your own, and this truth carries a weight that can reshape the way you walk through life. Grace is God's unmerited favor, his ability working in you and for you in ways you could never manufacture with human effort. It is the divine strength that fills the gaps left by your weakness, the covering that shields you when your own defenses fall short, and the provision that arrives where your resources have run dry. But the way this grace becomes alive and active in your journey is through prayer. Prayer is the spiritual ignition that sparks grace into motion, and without it, you may know about grace in theory but never experience its transforming power in reality. Human effort will only carry you so far. Determination, discipline, and skill are valuable, but there will always be moments in life when your abilities are simply not enough. You cannot heal your own broken heart. You cannot erase the mistakes of your past. You cannot control every storm that comes your way. That is why grace is necessary, because it is God stepping in where you fall short, and the doorway to that grace is opened when you pray. Prayer acknowledges that you cannot, but he can. Prayer admits that you lack, but he supplies. Prayer positions you under the flow of divine favor, allowing what you do not deserve and cannot manufacture to cover your life. When you pray, you activate grace that brings peace when anxiety surrounds you, strength when weakness overtakes you, and clarity when confusion clouds your mind. You activate grace that heals wounds others cannot see and restores opportunities you thought were gone forever. Grace is not passive. It moves, it works, it accomplishes what human power cannot. But it requires your surrender in prayer, because prayer is the act of releasing control and placing it in God's hand. Every time you kneel in prayer, every time you lift your voice in dependence, you are giving grace permission to operate fully in your life. This is why prayerless living often feels like powerless living. When prayer is absent, grace remains untapped, and you end up relying on yourself for what only God can do. You struggle with battles that were never yours to fight alone. But when prayer becomes consistent, grace becomes abundant. It flows into your weaknesses, your failures, and your limitations, and it lifts you into a strength you could not attain by yourself. Prayer doesn't twist God's arm or force his hand. It simply connects you to the supply he already promised to provide. Grace works best in places where you have no ability left. And prayer is what invites that grace into those very spaces. It is not your performance that moves God, but your dependence. It is not your perfection that activates grace, but your surrender. Every breakthrough you seek, every healing you desire, every restoration you long for rests in the realm of grace, and prayer is the key that unlocks that realm. Through prayer, You stop striving for what you can never earn and start receiving what only God can give. Through prayer, grace ceases to be a distant concept and becomes a living reality that carries you through every step of your journey. Prayer heals wounds, restores hope, and opens doors no one can shut. Prayer heals wounds, restores hope, and opens doors no one can shut, and this truth reveals why prayer is far more than a spiritual routine. It is a divine force that touches every area of your life. Life has a way of leaving scars, some visible and others hidden deep within the heart. People may smile on the outside while silently carrying pain from betrayal, loss, disappointment, or failure. Words spoken against you may echo for years. Mistakes you made may weigh heavily on your soul, and moments of rejection may convince you that you are not enough. But prayer reaches into those hidden places and applies the healing touch of God where nothing else can reach. Therapies and encouragement have their place, but only prayer brings the kind of wholeness that comes when heaven's hand touches the broken pieces of your life. Through prayer, wounds that seemed permanent begin to close, bitterness begins to dissolve, and forgiveness begins to flow, not by your own strength, but by the supernatural grace of God. Alongside healing, prayer restores hope when life tries to drain it away. Hope is often the first thing stolen in the face of setbacks and trials. When prayers seem unanswered or delays stretch longer than expected, discouragement tries to settle in and whisper that things will never change. But in prayer, you are reminded that God is not finished with your story, that his promises still stand, and that he has the final word over your circumstances. Prayer allows you to trade despair for expectation, replacing the heaviness of doubt with the assurance that something greater is still ahead. Even when nothing has shifted externally, prayer revives your spirit internally, giving you the courage to keep walking forward. It plants seeds of faith that tomorrow can look different, that restoration is possible, and that the same God who parted seas and raised the dead is able to intervene in your situation. Prayer also opens doors that no human hand can force open. Opportunities that seemed locked away, favor that appeared beyond reach, breakthroughs that looked impossible. These all respond to the movement of prayer. There are doors that talent cannot unlock, money cannot purchase, and influence cannot sway. But when prayer activates heaven's authority, those doors swing wide. God has the power to position you in rooms where your name was never mentioned, to place you in opportunities that your resume could not secure, and to connect you with resources you never saw coming. Prayer does not just change hearts. It shifts atmospheres, aligns circumstances, and creates pathways where none existed before. What makes this even more powerful is that once God opens a door through prayer, no one can shut it. Opposition may rise, critics may speak, and enemies may plot. But when God's hand establishes an opportunity, it cannot be overturned by human effort. That is why prayer is not wasted breath. It is the act of aligning with the one who holds the keys of authority in his hands. He decides which doors open and which remain closed, and through prayer, you learn to walk in his timing and his guidance rather than forcing your own way. Prayer heals what has been broken, breathes life into what felt dead, and grants access to what was once inaccessible, proving that it is one of the greatest forces available to transform your journey. The enemy fears your prayers because they dismantle his strategies. The enemy fears your prayers because they dismantle his strategies, and this is one of the most powerful truths you can carry in your heart. The enemy knows that as long as you stay silent, as long as you rely only on your strength and your understanding, his attacks can overwhelm you. But the moment you begin to pray, the moment you lift your voice in faith and call on heaven's authority, his plans start to unravel. Prayer is not just a comforting exercise, it is a weapon. It reaches into the spiritual realm where battles are fought long before they ever show up in the physical world. When you pray, you are calling on the power of the Almighty to stand against schemes designed to trap you, discourage you, or destroy you. That is why the enemy will distract you, discourage you, and do everything possible to keep you from praying, because he knows prayer has the power to cut off his influence in your life. Prayer dismantles fear, because it reminds your heart that God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. When fear tries to paralyze you, prayer speaks courage into your spirit. Prayer dismantles lies because when the enemy whispers falsehoods about your worth, your future, or your past, prayer fills your heart with the truth of God's word. Prayer dismantles temptation because when you invite God's strength into your weakness, the enemy loses his leverage. Prayer dismantles division because when hearts are humbled before God, bitterness and pride lose their grip. In every area where the enemy tries to build a stronghold, prayer tears it down brick by brick, replacing it with a strong foundation of God's presence and promises. The enemy cannot stand against a person who truly prays, because prayer brings heaven's authority into earthly situations. It is one thing for you to fight battles in your own ability, but it is another when you fight with God's power backing you. The enemy may try to bring sickness, but prayer releases healing. He may stir up confusion. Prayer brings wisdom. He may attempt to sow despair. Prayer brings unshakable hope. Every time you pray, you remind the enemy that you are not fighting alone and that his schemes will not prevail. He fears your prayers because they shift the battle from your hands into God's hands, and that is a battle he can never win. There is a reason distractions suddenly appear when you set your heart to pray. There is a reason fatigue, busyness, and excuses often rise up when you decide to commit to prayer. It is because the enemy knows what happens when you pray. Chains break, doors open, hearts change, and lives are transformed. He knows prayer invites the presence of God into your situation, and where the presence of God is, darkness cannot remain. He knows prayer invites divine covering over your family, your health, your future, and your purpose. And once that covering is in place, his weapons lose their effectiveness. Prayer is the most underestimated weapon in the hands of believers, but it is the very reason the enemy trembles. He fears the power of prayer because it cancels his plans, disrupts his influence, and replaces defeat with victory. The grace of prayer transforms your journey from brokenness to restoration. The grace of prayer transforms your journey from brokenness to restoration, because prayer is never just about speaking words into the air. It is about touching the very heart of God and allowing his presence to touch the deepest parts of your life. Every person walking through this world carries moments of brokenness, shattered dreams, wounded hearts, regrets from choices made, or pain caused by circumstances they never saw coming. Brokenness can weigh you down like an invisible chain, keeping you tied to yesterday and preventing you from stepping fully into tomorrow. But when you choose to pray, you are inviting grace into those very places of brokenness. And grace has the power to take what was once fractured and make it whole again. Prayer becomes the bridge between the pain of your past and the healing of your future, the connection point where heaven's mercy meets your earthly struggle. Through prayer, brokenness does not remain the final chapter of your story. Grace begins to rewrite the narrative, shifting your journey from despair to hope, from ashes to beauty, from mourning to joy. Prayer allows you to bring every fragment of your life, every shattered piece, into the presence of God and watch him assemble something far greater than what you lost. Restoration is not simply about returning to what once was. It is about God building something stronger, deeper, and more purposeful from what was broken. When you pray, you are not asking for a simple repair of the damage. You are asking for divine restoration that exceeds human expectation. Prayer invites God to breathe life into dead places, to resurrect what seemed gone forever, and to craft a testimony out of the very wounds that once defined you. The grace of prayer transforms the way you see your journey. Instead of walking under the heavy shadow of brokenness, prayer lifts your eyes to see the possibility of new beginnings. It shifts your perspective from focusing on the wounds to focusing on the one who heals. It takes the bitterness of what happened and replaces it with the sweetness of God's presence. When you pour out your heart in prayer, you exchange the burden of carrying brokenness for the strength that comes from knowing you are not walking alone. This is the grace that sustains you not because life becomes easy, but because you are empowered to rise again, to keep moving forward, to trust that what was broken is not the end of your story. As grace flows through prayer, restoration begins to manifest not only internally but externally. Relationships that seemed permanently damaged can experience forgiveness and renewal. Opportunities that seemed forever closed can suddenly reopen. Strength that was drained can return with greater force. Prayer brings restoration to your soul, your mind, your body, and even your destiny. The places where you felt disqualified can become the very areas God uses to display his power. The journey that once felt marked by loss and defeat becomes a journey that testifies of God's goodness, his faithfulness, and his ability to restore. Prayer carries you from the ashes of brokenness to the beauty of restoration, showing that no wound is too deep, no mistake too great, and no situation too far gone for the transforming grace of God to rewrite the story of your life.